2020. Senior project manager at software development company with 150 employees across engineering and product teams. Had been with company for 6 years. Working my way up from junior coordinator to senior management position. Was passionate about women's advancement in tech industry. Where I'd personally experienced being overlooked and underestimated, company was 65% male. With men dominating senior engineering positions and technical leadership roles across organization, noticed pattern in project teams where men would naturally take lead on technical decisions. Regardless of women's expertise, women engineers would propose solutions that got questioned extensively, while men's suggestions were accepted with minimal scrutiny. In planning meetings, male voices dominated discussions and direction setting. Even when women had more relevant experience, female teammates had confided feeling sidelined and talked over. Despite having strong technical skills and knowledge, made decision that women needed opportunities to lead without men automatically taking over and dominating projects. Brought proposal to VP of Engineering named Richard about creating women-led project teams for upcoming initiatives. He looked interested but concerned. Asking how exactly women-led teams would be structured and staffed, I explained we'd assign women as leads on major projects with primarily female team members. Men in supporting roles only. This would give women experience leading without male colleagues taking over or overshadowing their contributions. He said, "We have more male engineers than female. How would we balance workload if men are only in supporting roles?" I said, "Men could lead their own separate projects, while women led these specific initiatives without male interference." VP of Product named Jennifer, who was one of few women in leadership, supported idea enthusiastically. She said, "Women absolutely need opportunities to lead without men dominating. I never got those chances early in career." After debate, leadership approved pilot program. 3 major projects would be led by women with majority female teams, would run for 6 months to assess whether women-led structure, improved female leadership development, and project outcomes. Announced new women-led initiative projects at company all-hands meeting, explaining goals and structure to entire organization. 3 senior women engineers would each lead major project with teams of primarily female engineers and designers. Male team members could participate in supporting roles, but women would make all major technical and strategic decisions. Emphasized this was about creating leadership opportunities for women who'd been historically excluded from lead positions. Got immediate questions from male engineers about how this would affect their career development and project assignments. One senior engineer, named Tom, asked if men being excluded from leadership roles on these projects would impact advancement opportunities. I said men had plenty of other opportunities to lead. These 3 projects were specifically for women's development. Another engineer named Chris asked how teams would function effectively if most experienced engineers were excluded based on gender. I said we had plenty of highly skilled women engineers. Assumption that men were most experienced was exactly the problem. After meeting, got several concerned emails from male employees about feeling excluded from major strategic initiatives. One wrote, "I understand wanting to develop women leaders, but excluding men from significant projects feels discriminatory." I responded, "This isn't exclusion. It's creating equity by giving women space to lead without male dominance." Another wrote, "I have expertise directly relevant to one of these projects but can't contribute because I'm male." I responded, "You can contribute in supporting role. Women need opportunity to lead without men taking over." First, women-led project launched with senior engineer named Amanda leading development of new customer portal feature. Team was 7 women engineers plus 2 male engineers in junior supporting roles without decision-making authority. Initial planning sessions went well, with women collaborating effectively and Amanda providing clear technical direction. Second week hit major technical challenge requiring architecture decision about database scaling approach. Amanda's proposed solution was unconventional, but she felt confident it would work based on her analysis. Two male engineers on team tried to raise concerns about approach but were told this was women's decision to make. One woman on team named Sarah also had concerns, but didn't want to undermine Amanda's leadership publicly. Team proceeded with Amanda's architecture decision. Despite some internal uncertainty about approach, third week discovered Amanda's scaling solution wasn't working. As expected, performance issues emerged under testing, had to backtrack and redesign significant portions of architecture, putting project 2 weeks behind schedule. Amanda felt pressured to push forward without fully vetting approach because wanted to prove women could lead independently. If male engineers had been allowed to contribute to decision, might have identified issues before implementation. Second women-led project had similar issues. Team lead, named Maria, made strategic choice about API design. One male team member tried to suggest alternative based on his previous experience with similar implementations, was told his role was supporting, not decision-making. Maria would make strategic choices for project. Maria's approach created integration problems that weren't discovered until late in development cycle. Had to rework major components, causing delays and budget overruns that threatened project viability. Maria later admitted she'd felt isolated, making decision alone. Would have valued input from experienced team members, but structure we'd created made her feel like accepting male input meant failing at independent women's leadership. Third women-led project encountered client communication challenges. Team lead Jessica struggled with aggressive client stakeholder. Male account manager offered to join client meetings based on his existing relationship with stakeholder. Was told women needed to handle client relationships independently without men stepping in to rescue them. Client relationship deteriorated. Stakeholder complained to senior leadership about communication breakdowns. Jessica felt unsupported. Said she could have used experienced colleagues' help, but structure prevented collaboration. Month 2 of initiative and all 3 women-led projects were significantly behind schedule and over budget. Had emergency meeting with Richard about concerning trajectory of projects that were supposed to showcase women's leadership. He said, "I'm worried these projects are struggling specifically because of constraints we've placed on team composition." I said, "Projects are struggling because this is first time women are leading. There's natural learning curve involved." He said, "Learning curve is expected, but we've also prevented teams from accessing expertise that could help them succeed. By excluding men from decision M, we've isolated women leaders from valuable input." He said, "We've prevented both. These projects are too important to fail for sake of maintaining pure women-led structure without male input." I felt defensive, saying, if we let men back into decision-making, they'll dominate like always, and women won't get leadership experience. He said, "We need to find middle ground where women lead but can access full team expertise, regardless of gender. Otherwise, we're setting women up to fail by denying them resources they need to succeed in leadership roles." Week later had difficult conversation with Amanda about her projects, delays, and technical challenges. She said, "Honestly, I felt like I couldn't ask for help because whole point was proving women could lead independently. When I had doubts about architecture decision, I pushed them aside because didn't want to seem uncertain. If structure had allowed me to consult with experienced engineers regardless of gender, would have made better choice." I said, "But then men would have taken over decision-making like they always do in collaborative situations." She said, "Maybe, but I'd rather have made better decision with input than worse decision to prove I didn't need help." Excluding people with relevant expertise from decisions doesn't prove women's capability, it just handicaps us unnecessarily. This feedback troubled me deeply. Had Amanda felt set up to fail by structure meant to support her? Had similar conversations with Maria and Jessica? Both expressed feeling isolated and unsupported by rigid team structure. Maria said, "I appreciate opportunity to lead, but excluding half the talent pool from contributing felt arbitrary." Jessica said, "When client relationship got difficult, I needed support, but asking for it felt like admitting women-led structure failed, so I struggled alone and projects suffered. That doesn't demonstrate women's leadership capability effectively." Month 3 held retrospective meeting with all 3 women project. leads to discuss what was and wasn't working. All three expressed appreciation for leadership opportunity, but frustration with constraints that prevented accessing help. Amanda said, separating by gender created artificial limitation. I should be able to consult anyone with relevant expertise. Maria said, women-led shouldn't mean women, only in decision. M should mean women in charge of collaborative process. Jessica said, I felt like I had to choose between getting help I needed and maintaining women-led structure. That's false choice that hurt both my development and project outcomes significantly. Asked, what structure would have worked better for developing their leadership while not handicapping projects? All three said they wanted authority as project leads, but flexibility to consult and collaborate with full team. They wanted to be in charge of decisions, but not prohibited from accessing expertise and input from male colleagues. Sarah, who was team member on Amanda's project, said rigid structure actually undermined Amanda's authority. When she had to enforce that men couldn't contribute to decisions, it positioned her as excluding people, not leading them. If she'd been able to invite input while maintaining decision-making, authority would have strengthened her leadership. This feedback made me realize structure I'd created was different from what these women actually needed. Had meeting with Richard to discuss restructuring women-led projects based on leads' feedback about what wasn't working. He said, I appreciate you listening to their concerns. What changes are you proposing to make projects successful? I said, women should remain project leads with final decision authority, but can consult full team regardless of gender. He said, so women-led means women have authority and accountability, but access to all resources and expertise. I said yes. Isolating them from male colleagues, input was supposed to prevent men from taking over, but actually just denied women access to expertise they needed while making them feel unsupported in leadership. He said, this is what I tried to suggest initially, but I'm glad leads themselves identified what structure they need. Announced restructured approach at team meeting. Women would retain project lead authority with expanded collaboration. Amanda could consult with any team member, regardless of gender, while maintaining final decision-making power. Maria could invite input from male engineers while remaining clearly in charge of strategic direction. Jessica could ask male account manager to join client meetings while maintaining her role as client relationship led. Initially worried this would result in men taking over, but women leads actively managed collaborative process. Amanda consulted with senior male engineer about architecture, then made informed decision incorporating his expertise. She remained clearly in charge while benefiting from collaborative input that strengthened her decision. Maria invited team discussion about API design, including male engineers' perspectives, then synthesized into direction. She demonstrated leadership by facilitating collaboration, not by excluding people from contributing. Jessica brought male account manager to client meeting, but maintained her role as primary relationship owner. She used his support strategically while retaining authority over client relationship and communication. Month 4, after restructuring all 3 projects, showed significant improvement in progress and team dynamics. Women leads reported feeling more confident in decisions because they'd consulted broadly before making choices. Team members, both male and female, reported feeling more engaged because their expertise was valued. Projects began catching up to schedules as technical decisions improved with broader input and collaboration. Had check-in with Jennifer, the VP of Product, who'd initially supported women's structure. She said, I'm glad you adjusted based on feedback. Original structure was well-intentioned, but too rigid. I made similar mistake early in career, thinking I had to do everything alone to prove women's capability. Actually, leadership is knowing when and how to leverage team expertise while maintaining authority. Asked her why she hadn't warned me that isolating women from male colleagues' input would be problematic. She said, honestly, I was caught up in idea of women-only spaces and didn't think through practical implications. Your willingness to adjust when leads gave feedback showed better leadership than my initial enthusiastic support. Month 5. All 3 women-led projects were on track to meet deadlines with strong technical outcomes. Women leads developed confidence and skills in collaborative leadership rather than isolated decision-making. Several male engineers commented that working on these projects had taught them about supporting rather than dominating. One said being in supporting role initially felt like demotion but taught me valuable lessons about collaboration. I learned to contribute expertise without taking over. That skill I now use on all projects, regardless of lead's gender. Another male engineer said watching Amanda consult broadly, then make strong decisions, showed me what inclusive leadership looks like. She didn't need to exclude people to maintain authority. She invited input and remained clearly in charge. Project outcomes were strong across all 3 initiatives delivered on time with innovative technical solutions. Leadership team did assessment of women-led initiative, comparing outcomes to similar projects with traditional structure. Results showed comparable technical outcomes but significantly higher team satisfaction on women-led projects. Women leads developed leadership skills that transferred to other projects and roles. Male team members reported learning collaborative skills that improved their work on other projects. Had final retrospective with all 3 women, leads about what they'd learned through 6-month initiative. Amanda said most important lesson was that leadership doesn't mean doing everything alone or refusing help. It means having authority to make decisions while being smart enough to gather input from people with expertise. Maria said, I learned that women-led can mean different things. Should focus on women's authority, not women's isolation. Jessica said, initial structure felt like we were being tested to prove women could succeed without any support. Adjusted structure let us prove we could lead effectively by using all available resources. Well, all 3 said they'd recommend similar initiatives for other women. But with collaborative structure from beginning, don't isolate women from male colleagues' expertise, give them authority to lead collaborative processes, presented findings to leadership team with recommendations for future women's leadership development initiatives, recommended creating more opportunities for women to lead major projects with full collaborative authority, suggested mentoring programs pairing women leaders with senior engineers of all genders for broader support, proposed leadership training focused on collaborative decision-making rather than independent, isolated leadership. Richard said, this is much more sustainable approach than original structure, builds on what actually worked. Jennifer said, I'm glad we tried bold approach. Even though it needed adjustment, we learned valuable lessons. Posted on LinkedIn about experience leading women's initiative and lessons learned about collaborative leadership. Got mixed responses. Some feminists criticized me for backing down from women-only structure, they said, by allowing men back into decision-making. I'd undermined whole point of women-led initiative. Others appreciated honest assessment of what worked and didn't said they'd experienced similar challenges. One woman commented, I led women-only project at my company and felt exactly this pressure to succeed without help. Your honesty about adjusting approach when women needed support validates experience. I felt guilty about. Another commented, this shows leadership development requires support and resources, not just authority and isolation. Several male engineers commented, appreciating acknowledgement that supporting doesn't mean dominating. One wrote, learning to contribute without taking over was valuable skill development for me as male engineer. Year after women-led initiative, all 3 leads had been promoted to senior leadership positions. Amanda became engineering manager, leading team of 15. Maria became technical architect. Jessica became senior product lead. All credited experience leading major projects with developing skills and confidence for advancement, but also said restructured collaborative approach was crucial. Isolated structure would have set them up for failure. Had conversation with Amanda about how her experience leading that project had prepared her for management role. She said learning to make decisions with input from team while maintaining clear authority was essential leadership skill. If structure had kept me isolated from male colleagues' expertise, I wouldn't have learned collaborative leadership. I would have learned to make decisions alone, which isn't how effective leadership actually works. Maria said similar thing about her path to technical architect role requiring collaborative decision-making, said Women-Led Project, taught me to invite diverse perspectives, then synthesize into strong technical direction. That's core skill of architecture. if I'd learned to exclude people based on gender would have limited my effectiveness. Jessica said, managing client relationships requires knowing when to bring in support and when to handle things independently. Initial structure didn't allow that flexibility. He adjusted structure, let me develop judgment about strategic collaboration. These conversations confirmed that adjusted approach had been right, even though it felt like compromise initially. 2 years after Initiative started consulting with other companies wanting to implement similar women's leadership development, main advice was always focus on giving women authority, not on isolating them from male colleagues. Women-led should mean women in charge of collaborative process, not women excluded from accessing expertise. One company I consulted with made same mistake we'd made initially. Created women-only project teams, called me 6 weeks later saying projects were struggling and women felt unsupported and isolated. Helped them restructure to give women collaborative authority rather than isolated responsibility. 3 months later, they reported dramatically improved outcomes and women's satisfaction with development opportunity. Started speaking at women in tech conferences about lessons from implementing, then restructuring women-led initiative. Main message was that women's leadership development requires support and resources, not just opportunity. Giving women authority while denying them access to expertise sets them up for failure, not success. Some audience members challenged this, saying women-only spaces are necessary for development without male interference. I responded, women-only networks and affinity groups serve different purpose than project leadership. For actual leadership development, women need authority over real projects with real stakes and full resources. That means access to expertise from everyone regardless of gender while maintaining women's decision-making power. Other speakers agreed. Several shared similar experiences of women-only initiatives that struggled due to isolation. One speaker said, "We created women-only leadership program, but didn't give them resources to succeed. They failed, and it reinforced stereotype that women weren't ready for leadership rather than showing we'd set them up poorly." 3 years after Women-Led Initiative, our company had significantly improved women's representation in leadership. Women now held 40% of senior, technical, and product leadership positions compared to 15% before Initiative. Not because of women-only structure, but because women got authority to lead real projects with full support. Male engineers had also benefited from learning collaborative skills and how to support without dominating or taking over. Company culture had shifted toward more collaborative leadership regardless of lead's gender. Had recent conversation with Richard about impact of Initiative on broader organizational culture. He said, "Initially, I was skeptical about women's structure, especially rigid gender separation, but adjusted approach created positive changes that extended far beyond just those 3 projects. Women got leadership experience that prepared them for advancement. Men learned collaborative skills. Everyone learned that effective leadership is about authority over collaborative process, not isolated decision-making." He asked him what he'd learned about supporting women's advancement through this experience. He said, "I learned that good intentions aren't enough. Structure matters tremendously for outcomes. We had good intention of developing women leaders, but initial structure actually handicapped them. Listening to their feedback and adjusting was more important than defending original approach." Recently, Amanda, who led first women-led project, became VP of Engineering, replacing Richard, who retired. In her announcement, she mentioned how that project had been formative in developing her leadership approach, said learning to lead collaboratively while maintaining clear authority was foundation of her management philosophy. She now mentors other women leaders, emphasizing importance of building support systems, not trying to succeed alone. Current reflection, 4 years after implementing then restructuring women-led project initiative, learned that women's leadership development requires authority and support, not authority versus support, that isolating women from male colleagues' expertise to prevent domination actually prevented their success. That effective leadership, regardless of gender, is about facilitating collaboration, not working in isolation. Most importantly, that listening to women about what they actually need is more important than imposing structure. Amanda, Maria. And Jessica told us original structure wasn't working. Adjusting based on their feedback was crucial. That's what I learned from demanding men step back. And panicking when projects started imploding. From thinking women needed isolation from men, to realizing women needed authority with full collaborative support, from rigid gender separation to flexible collaborative authority that actually developed women's leadership. That's my complete story about learning difference between giving women opportunity and setting them up for success. 4 years after Women-Led Initiative started publishing research paper about findings in Management Journal titled Collaborative Authority versus Isolated Leadership Lessons from Women-Led Project Initiative. Paper detailed how initial rigid structure handicapped women by isolating them from expertise and support, and how adjusted collaborative structure enabled women to lead effectively while accessing full team resources. Got significant response from organizational researchers studying women's leadership development programs. Many said they'd observed similar pattern, well-intentioned women, only initiatives struggling due to isolation. One researcher commented, "Your findings confirm what we've seen. Leadership development requires resources, not just authority." Another said, "The distinction between collaborative authority and isolated responsibility is crucial for program design." Started getting consulting requests from Fortune 500 companies wanting to avoid mistakes we'd made initially. Major tech company had implemented women-only innovation teams that were failing to deliver results. Women on teams felt unsupported and set up to fail. Men felt excluded from important strategic work. Help them restructure to give women collaborative authority rather than isolated responsibility for innovation. 6 months later, they reported women-led innovation teams were outperforming traditional teams on multiple metrics. Women had authority to lead while accessing expertise from full organization, regardless of gender. A financial services firm had created women-only client service teams with similar problems we'd experienced. Women felt pressured to succeed without support. Clients complained about limited access to senior expertise. Restructured so women led client relationships with full collaborative support from experienced colleagues. Results improved dramatically. Women developed client management skills while clients got excellent service. 5 years after initiative, Amanda, who is now VP of Engineering, implemented company-wide collaborative leadership program based on lessons from women-led projects focused on authority with collaboration rather than authority through isolation. Program trained all leaders regardless of gender in facilitating collaborative decision-making processes, how to invite diverse input while maintaining clear authority and accountability for decisions. Results showed improved project outcomes and team satisfaction across organization. Not just women-led teams. Collaborative leadership approach we learned through trial and error became standard for entire company. Started teaching MBA courses at local university about implementing effective diversity initiatives. Used women-led project case study to illustrate difference between symbolic and substantive support. Symbolic support gives women titles and opportunities without resources needed to succeed. Substantive support gives women authority and full access to expertise and resources for effective leadership. Students found case study valuable. Many had witnessed failed diversity initiatives at previous employers. One student said, "My company has women-only leadership development program that feels exactly like what you described. Women get opportunities but not support, then struggle, and it reinforces negative stereotypes about capability. Your case study helps me understand what's wrong and how to advocate for better structure." Recently spoke at Women in Leadership Conference about sustainable approaches to developing women leaders. Emphasized that women don't need to be isolated from men to develop leadership skills. They need authority over real work with real stakes and full access to organizational resources. Isolation doesn't protect women from male domination. It deprives them of expertise they need to succeed. One audience member pushed back, saying, "Men always take over in collaborative settings, so separation is necessary." I responded, "That's management problem, not collaboration problem. Leaders should prevent domination. In our restructured projects, women maintain clear authority while collaborating. Men learn to support, not dominate. That's a sustainable model because it changes culture rather than just separating people by gender. Another speaker agreed, saying she'd led women-only division that struggled with same isolation problems. Said women in her division felt like they were playing leadership while real decisions happened elsewhere. Once they integrated with full organization while maintaining women's authority, their impact increased dramatically. 6 years after women-led initiative, all 3 original leads are now in executive leadership positions. Amanda is VP of Engineering. Maria is Chief Technology Officer. Jessica is VP of Product. All 3 regularly mentor other women. Emphasizing collaborative leadership over isolated achievement, they tell Mintz that asking for help and building support systems is strength, not weakness. That effective leadership requires knowing who has relevant expertise and how to leverage it while maintaining authority. Our company's women's leadership pipeline is strongest it's ever been, with 45% women in senior leadership. Not because we isolate women, but because we give them collaborative authority over important work. Male colleagues have learned to support women's leadership without dominating or taking over. Culture shift happened because we addressed how people work together, not just who leads. What recently had reunion dinner with Amanda, Maria, and Jessica, reflecting on Journey from Women-led initiative. Amanda said, "Remembering how isolated and pressured I felt initially makes me appreciate what we learned. Having to prove women could succeed without any help wasn't empowering. It was handicapping us unnecessarily." Maria said, "I'm glad we spoke up about needing restructured approach rather than struggling in silence. Could have failed trying to maintain women-only structure, but asking for support led to actual success." Jessica said, "The most important thing we learned is leadership isn't about doing everything alone. It's about having authority to make decisions while being smart enough to gather input and build support." All 3 agreed that lesson has been more valuable in their executive careers than anything else from that experience. Current reflections 7 years after demanding men step back and panicking when projects imploded. Learned that women's advancement requires changing how organizations work, not just isolating women, that giving women authority without support sets them up for failure, not success, that collaborative leadership is more effective than isolated leadership regardless of gender, that men can learn to support without dominating when culture and structure enable it. Most importantly, that listening to women about what they actually need matters more than imposing well-intentioned structure. That's everything I learned from creating women-led projects that struggled until we restructured for collaboration. From thinking isolation protected women to learning collaboration with clear authority empowered them. From rigid gender separation to flexible collaborative leadership that benefits everyone. That's my complete journey from demanding men step back to learning we all succeed better working together